I'm Tennille.
And I'm Kelsey, and we're financial advisors from 𝐴𝑙𝑚𝑎𝑛 Partners True Wealth, bringing you thought-provoking conversations around you, your money and your life on the Wealth Experience podcast. Welcome back, listeners, to the Wealth Experience podcast today. You are here with Kelsey, and unfortunately we don't have Tennille's presence today. She's very, very unwell. So hopefully I'll try and keep things interesting for you today. And on this episode, we aim to hopefully inspire you to prioritise your mental and physical health and actually use this as a wealth building strategy. And what we're really talking about here is the silent wealth killer, which is burnout. And, you know, whilst you can feel that you're crushing it at work and you've got a busy schedule and you're ticking all the things off the list, makes you feel like you're kicking your goals. But if you're running on fumes, this is when you're actually burning through the most valuable asset, which is you. So when we're talking about burnout, let's actually firstly define that, because burnout is the emotional, physical, and or mental exhaustion causing prolonged stress, and it generally presents itself as brain fog, irritability, low motivation, and unfortunately health issues as well. And it's not just about being tired, because I think a lot of people are tired, but true burnout really does impact your performance, your decision making, creativity, and it can impact the longevity of your career on occasions. And then, you know, recognizing and managing burnout is therefore so important for your wealth, which might sound a little bit counterintuitive, because I think there's this long-held belief that when you're working harder and harder and longer hours and doing all the things in your personal life that you want to achieve, you're almost wearing burnout as a badge of honor, almost as if resting is laziness. But I certainly think that, you know, perhaps the younger generations are realising that it's actually about working smarter, not harder. And of course, we always like our stats. So an interesting stat for you is that high stress industries, burnout is actually responsible for 50% of workforce turnover. And the World Health Organization, who monitors and provides these stats across the world, has actually recognised that burnout is it's a workplace syndrome. So, you know, if you're a business owner, you also really need to be paying attention to this and think about how you can foster environments that help people focus on mental and physical health while still being productive. So let's understand how those two things can work together. How can you be productive, excel in your career, excel in your personal life, have great mental and physical health without actually burning out? So before we then jump into the financial cost of burnout, let's think about, why do we as a human race push ourselves to the point of burnout? And I think there's a couple of things that spring to mind that are probably most prominent for a lot of society today. And I believe that a lot of self-worth is tied to productivity. Almost the thought of, if I'm not achieving, I'm not valuable. And I certainly see this, you know, if you're a high achiever, most of the time you're somewhat of a perfectionist, and this can lead to chronically overextending yourself, which of course then leads to burnout. And at the other end of the spectrum there, which is not necessarily about achieving and producing for yourself, but it's actually people pleasing and wanting to please others. So always saying yes and never saying no. That can cause burnout too. But I think as a society as a whole, cultural and societal expectations of always being on with having smartphones, remote work, etc. There's really blurred boundaries of, you know, where things stop and start. You know, and again, as I'd mentioned, I think there's this tendency for people, you know, working long hours to wear it as a badge of honour, to prove dedication and to prove success. And therefore, we really have systems that normalise burnout. You know, people don't burn out because they're weak or lazy. They burn out because we're trying to meet impossible expectations in a system that doesn't actually reward rest, reflection, or boundary setting. And all of those things are so important, those last three things there, to prevent burnout. So Let's get into it today and have a look at the financial fallout of being burnt out. So the hard numbers and the real world impact to people. So first of all, the brain fog. This is absolutely something, and we've all experienced it, no doubt, at some point in our lives for different reasons. But it can actually make you make poor financial decisions. So what actually then happens to the brain during burnout? Well, the prefrontal cortex actually shrinks. So let's just think about that at the moment. If you're burnt out, your brain, an area of your brain, the prefrontal cortex shrinks, which is part of the brain that's actually responsible for decision making, your working memory and emotional regulation, which can make it really hard to concentrate and think clear. And what this can lead to is, really short-term bad decisions, missed opportunities. You might spend impulsively if we're thinking about the financial impact. So really, really important to keep your brain healthy, because without our brains, we're not very much at all. So when we think about it from the context then of career, and this is the one that people might find a little bit counterintuitive, because you're actually reducing your productivity when you've got burnout. And of course, that can lead to you not receiving that promotion that you wanted, or not getting the bonus that you wanted because you're not being as productive as you would have liked. And there's also a lot to be said there about the fact that it impacts the emotional regulation when we're thinking about the brain impact. The lack of ability to actually manage your emotions well could have an impact on your ability to take on a leadership or a management position, because we know now that emotional IQ is so important in the workforce, and is probably the biggest factor in determining whether you will be promoted into that position and operate well in that space. So something to really, really think about there. But if we're thinking about it then from another perspective, which is one of being a business owner, ensuring that you keep the finger on the pulse of burnout in your workforce is critical, because we know there's a very, very clear correlation between workplace stress and higher absenteeism, which means that your workforce is less reliable, and therefore it starts impacting the end user too, and therefore business outcomes, etc., etc. And of course, a very obvious issue that having burnout across your workforce can cause issues to your culture as well. What sort of culture are you fostering if everybody is burnt out? And that's also something that's becoming more and more important. We spend most of our lives at the job with people that we work with. So then, as an individual, jumping back to looking at you as an individual then, if you're not managing burnout, you're probably going to end up leaving your job, and this can lead to job hopping, and there is actually a financial cost to that too, because it's a little bit compounding. You're losing out on experience, you're probably looking less reliable, probably less nowadays, because I think it's quite common for people to move around quite often to get the career advancements that they want, but it can have an impact on your income as well, of course. So in summary, from a career standpoint, it doesn't actually pay in the long term to be pushing the boundaries beyond what you can effectively manage. And you're therefore more likely to be successful if you don't get to the point of burnout.
Want to invest your hard-earned money but don't know where to start? 𝐴𝑙𝑚𝑎𝑛 Partners True Wealth presents AP Direct Invest, your online self-directed investment solution. Choose from 6 low-cost exchange-traded fund portfolios, including 2 socially responsible options. To manage your own investment experience, visit 𝐴𝑙𝑚𝑎𝑛.com.au/AP Direct Invest and start your investment journey today. AP Direct Invest, your investment solution. Any financial product advice is general advice only and may not be appropriate for you. Always read the PDS.
Let's have a look at another tangent then, which is the health cost. So clearly, with burnout, there's going to be a health cost, which depending on your situation and where you live, that could look slightly different. But if you're not well, you're going to have increased medical bills. You're going to have lost income from being sick. And of course, if it's something more of a long-term issue that's happening here, then and you've got more of a chronic illness, then you've got reduced working years and quality of life. And all of those things have a financial impact. And of course, it's all one round robin, because these things also lead to a mental health cost as well. So yeah, certainly something to think about there in terms of your health. If you don't have your health, you don't really have anything. Okay, so let's have a think about then the mental health space. So anxiety and depression, hypertension, so high blood pressure, immune system suppression, poor sleep, hormonal and metabolic deregulation, and so on, all can have an impact as well. And, you know, I'm probably speaking to a lot of people here in one of those areas that you can say, oh, yep, that's me. And, you know, burnout could be causing this for you. And there was actually a stat from the World Health Organization again that every dollar spent in treating depression and anxiety, there was a $4 return in health and productivity. So that really does go a long way in speaking to the impact of mental health conditions on us as a society. And I think what's really clear is that we need to reprioritise and reframe our health. We're in a world that we're in more contact and more switched on than ever. So I certainly think it's a relevant topic that we need to now openly address. And I think we are. I think we're getting there. But in true financial advisor fashion, let's have a look at the return of investment on managing burnout and focusing on your health. So there's a couple of tangents to your health, and the first one, let's talk about physical health. So exercise improves your cognitive performance. So we mentioned at the start of the podcast that burnout can actually negatively affect the brain and specifically the prefrontal cortex function. Exercise can actually positively impact this area of the brain too, which is responsible for decision making, focus and control. So there's an excuse to go and exercise because it actually does improve your brain. So if you think of it like this, your prefrontal cortex is the brain's CEO. When you exercise it regularly, you're literally feeding that CEO more oxygen, blood flow and energy so that it can make better decisions. You know, whether that's closing a deal, handling stress, or saying no to that impulse purchase, whatever that may be. And it really does then give you energy. And if you're actually giving your body energy, you're more productive. And another thing here is, you know, exercise doesn't have to be, some form of physical exercise doesn't have to be so intense. The important part here is that research has shown that it just has to be consistent. So from a financial perspective, we think dollar cost averaging, but for wellness. And this is powerful because I think most of the time, you know, there can be a really easy excuse to say, I don't have time to exercise. But if it's just small, consistent steps, then it's certainly more manageable to fit into your day, whether that's a 15-minute walk on your lunch break, etc. So you get up 15 minutes earlier and go and do some exercise, whatever that may be, just more consistent and build it as a habit and a routine. Tennille's not here, of course, but we were talking recently about how do we fit more exercise in our day. And we was looking at the desk treadmills. So I'd be really interested to see if anybody has one and if they've used it and if they're finding that as they're walking at the desk, whether their brain's functioning better. So give us your feedback. We want to hear that before we make that investment ourselves. Okay, so the next part then is your mental health. How can you get a return on investment with good mental health? Because it's certainly just as important as the physical. And it should be something that we deem important, not just because, you know, we've already hit the wall and we're not doing well. You need to actually stop yourself from getting there somehow. And I think that we're seeing across workforces in particular, employers are making this more of a priority. And there's a really good reason for that because a mentally healthy workforce perform much better, lower turnover and more productivity. But it's not just from a work focus because it also should be a life focus. Having strong mental health impacts all facets of your life, including relationships with family and friends and your inner happiness. And, you know, absolutely no doubt there's lots of people out there that do have mental health conditions that is not relevant to burnout. But when we're talking about it from a burnout perspective and that's the cause, there's some things that you can do to help manage that, and finding the time to practice mindfulness, perhaps engaging in therapy and coaching can help you make better decisions. And I think the one for me personally, I like the idea and the power of actually having a coach. I don't think this one is talked about enough. Everybody needs a coach, no matter where you are in your life or on the professional ladder that you've climbed, because they can really help you identify what's draining you, what's energizing you, where to set boundaries and how to sustain your energy and your motivation. And emotional intelligence is the top predictor of leadership success, and coaching is certainly one of those areas that can help you develop in that space. So let's then talk a little bit more about practical strategies that you can employ in your life to try and avoid or get yourself out of the burnout phase. So here's a little bit of a toolkit for you. So the first thing is build health into your budget. So you should include things like, maybe sports or gym memberships, meals, healthy meals, and therapy sessions, whatever that, coaching sessions, whatever that may be. Build that into your financial budget. No excuses, because there is a return on investment, as we're talking about. As I mentioned, take micro breaks throughout the day. Maybe just go for a walk, get out in the sunshine. And this is another one, actually. I've done this for myself recently, where you schedule an annual wellness day. And perhaps that's one for employers to think about. How do you build that into an employee package? But yeah, just having a day off, doing nothing other than focusing on your wellness in whatever way works best for you. And if you are one of those people that say yes to everything, just say no more often. You do it in small steps. You don't have to start saying no to everything. That's certainly not the way to go. But how do you find a way to do that? And that might be where you work with a coach to help you say no better. And use automation as much as you can for finances and health, for your meal plans, savings, calendar reminders. AI is certainly working a lot better for us nowadays. And if you did a little bit of exploring in that space, there's always something that AI can help with nowadays. And another thing is that I think it's really important to recognise the signs early. And that might be that you're feeling tired all the time, even after you've had a rest. Or you're struggling to concentrate and everything feels a bit foggy and you're a little bit detached, or you might be in this realm where you're just really negative about everything. And, that's a sign of emotional exhaustion. And you might be irritable, you might have headaches, digestive problems. So all of these signs, if we listen to our bodies are telling us that we need to take some time for ourselves and care for ourselves. And, there really, really is a return on investment from looking after ourselves. I think it's been clear today. And employees as well, they definitely have a role in managing this. Like I said, we spend most of our time at work, so it is a big part of our life. And that's through, focusing on a healthy work culture, maybe having role clarity, building in flexibility and really good communication can all go a long way in helping people not get to the point of burnout. So I'll leave you with those thoughts today. And I do have a couple of quotes. I always like a couple of quotes in wrapping up the episode. So first one, you wouldn't let your car run out of oil. You'd stop, refuel and get back on the road. Why treat your body or mind any differently? Another one, you can't pour from an empty cup. Burnout isn't weakness. It's your system asking for a redesign. And I really like that one of saying redesign, because it really is about going, well, how do I do things differently and build that into my life rather than just going, I need to just make a change for a few days and then we'll get back to it and do the same thing again. I think it has to be a way of life, if you like. So I'm going to ask listeners to do a personal health audit this week and share this episode with anybody that you think could really do with listening to this to make improvements in their life and get out of the burnout state. So hopefully you enjoyed today's episode. As always, we're really keen to have your feedback, comments. Please subscribe if you do like our content and put forward any suggestions of what you'd like to hear more of. And we'll see you next time on the Wealth Experience podcast.
The opinions of the presenters are objectively ascertainable and are not intended to be financial product or personal advice.